Hello and welcome to our webinar today on strategies and pitfalls of selling and purchasing a business. This webinar is a joint presentation with the South Australian Business Chamber and RWC Business Sales. RWC Business Sales is part of the Ray White Group, as you can see from our banner behind, RWC being Ray White Commercial. We've got some really good numbers for this webinar, so if you've got questions that you want to ask on the way through, log those questions and we will answer as many as we can before the webinar is finished so that everybody benefits from those questions. Alternatively, if we don't get to your question, we will actually contact you and personally answer the question for you. The purpose of today's webinar is to have a look at how you would best prepare not just the business for a sale, but yourselves. When a person sells a business, it can be quite an emotional experience. We define ourselves as humans in part by what we do. I've been a vendor twice myself, so I know what the journey's like. I've been a purchaser twice myself, so I know what that journey's like. So the idea is to go through the points that you'll think about or should think about from preparing the business with financials, processes, procedures, those sorts of things, but also making sure that you yourself are prepared to be able to transact your business, knowing that at a certain date you'll hand the business over and somebody else will become the owner and you will no longer be the person who defines themselves by that business. So firstly, let's have a look at vendor preparation. So a vendor is a seller. If you want to sell your business, and you may not want to sell it today or tomorrow, but you might be thinking, well, eventually I've got to sell my business, or eventually I'd like to sell my business. The first key to it is to have your financial statements ready for the previous 3 years. A purchaser's accountant will want to see at least 3 years of your financial statements, not just profit and loss statements, not just spreadsheets, but actual financial statements, those statements that are used for you putting your tax in. And they'll want to make sure that those statements align with the return on investment they're looking for. So when you're looking at your financial statements, remember that it's net profit that it shows. When we sell a business, we don't sell on net profit, or we shouldn't. What we should be selling on is either EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation, or PBITDA, which is proprietor's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation. The difference between the two is that EBITDA is where a person may acquire a business without planning on working in the business themselves. So they'll engage a manager to run that business for them. PBITDA is an owner-operator. They will come up with separate figures, but the next step is that your financials will be used once they're normalised to either a PBITDA or an EBITDA. The next step will be a multiple, and that multiple needs to be what is actually current in the market. So if you are selling your business, it's really important that you pick a broker who has the ability to give you up-to-date, real-time multiple information, not simply we sold one of these a year ago and this is what we got for it. Have your year-to-date management profit and loss ready. And that's really important, particularly if you are selling, in any time after the first quarter, so October onwards in a financial year, because a purchaser is going to want to make sure that the business is running as usual, that it's at least producing the revenues that it was in the previous financial year for that quarter, and hopefully higher revenues. Because once they know you're selling, they are going to look at, are you still engaged with the business or have you dropped the ball? So those year-to-date financials are important. And it's really important when you think about that, that you should be thinking about your business as business as usual. So if you've got to make certain purchases to keep expanding the business, to keep it going, then that's what you should do. The average business in Australia at the moment is taking about 11.5 months to sell. They're not like a house. You know, you go to an open for inspection, somebody shows up, by Monday you've got a draft contract on the table. It doesn't work that way with a business. They take a long time. So for that reason, you've got to have your mind around the fact that I'm still running this business and I'm going to continue to still run this business until the day of settlement. Forewarn your accountant. So if you are saying to yourself, you know what, I'm 60 years old, I want to retire at 62, sit down with your accountant and say, I'm going to be putting the business on the market in 12 to 24 months. So what do we need to do? What is it we need to do, you as the accountant, me as the business owner, to ensure that my business is ready to transact and really can be shown in the best light? Your accountant will have a very important role in a process called due diligence. Now, due diligence is a process where the purchaser, at their discretion, has the ability to look at all of the supporting documentation and information that your business has that is supporting the figures you've given the purchaser. So due diligence is all about them ensuring that what you've put forward to them to be able to achieve a sell price and be able to achieve their interest is actually supported. Review any property leases. So if you're leasing property, some businesses have multiple sites. You know, we deal with businesses that in some cases have 30 or 40 sites. That's 30 or 40 different landlords, 30 or 40 different leases, and so it goes. Review them. Make sure that those leases are in a condition that can be transferred or assigned to a new owner of the business. You don't necessarily have to talk to your landlord about it yet, but you really do need to understand your responsibilities in the lease, particularly post-settlement, because some leases will still hold you responsible for a period of time after you sell the business. So be aware of that. Don't have it be a shock to you at settlement that you actually still have some level of responsibility. Equally, if your lease is about to expire, a purchaser may very well be looking for a long-term lease if your business is geographically reliant. So if you were a fast food outlet that you were looking at or that you were selling, you are at a level geographically reliant. You need to be in that position because people know where to go to see your business or to buy your product. So you need to make sure that the leases are okay. Have knowledge of forward orders and WIP, what we call WIP, which is work in progress. And the reason that's important is because you as a vendor will be compensated on your work in progress. You'll be compensated, or should be compensated, on your stock at its value, in other words, what you paid for it, including any taxes, GST, and work in progress. So if you manufacture scoreboards, for example, and you have jobs that are still on the production line at the time of settlement, you need to be able to identify the costs that you've incurred to get it to that level, because the person buying your business is going to sell that product, they're going to invoice it, they're going to get the revenue from it. You need to be compensated accordingly. The next is understand vendor assistance and your responsibilities with vendor assistance. So vendor assistance is, people will sit there and say, I've got to give 2 or 3 weeks or a month or whatever. It's not that simple. Depending on the complexity of the business and the role that the vendor plays in that business operationally, vendor assistance can differ. We've transacted businesses where vendor assistance went for 5 years. Obviously the vendor is compensated accordingly, and obviously in those cases it suited both the vendor and the purchaser. We've transacted businesses where vendor assistance lasted for a month. We've transacted businesses where the agreement is for 3 months, but the purchaser after 1 month says to the vendor, I'm fine. But you need to understand what is your responsibility as the vendor and what position are you prepared to give. If you sit back and say, you know what, I'm prepared to give 6 months, that's fine. Because whichever broker is handling that transaction for you understands that, and they know that that's what they can offer to a purchaser. We don't want to be offering something you don't want to do. And equally, if you don't give enough vendor assistance, a lot of purchasers and their accountants will walk away, and in many cases so too these days will the banks. So going on with the vendor, the next thing you've got to look at is there is a process of financing called vendor finance. Now, you don't have to participate in this, but it is sometimes asked for. And it's also asked for in different terminology. So somebody might turn around and say, a purchaser might say, I want an earn-out. So they're two different things. So vendor finance, first of all, is where you're selling your business for $1 million. I've got $800,000, including what I can borrow from the bank. Separately, I have enough working capital to run the business. I'm $200,000 short. Mr. Vendor or Mrs. Vendor, would you please lend me $200,000 and I will pay you that amount of money plus interest over this period of time. Understand where you sit on vendor finance. And to be frank, the first thing to look at is if you are prepared to look at vendor finance, you need to obviously look at it on a case-by-case basis. What do you think about the purchaser's ability to pay you back? Because that's really, you're becoming one of the banks that's supporting them. Now, an earn-out is different. An earn-out is where you've agreed on an EBITDA. If you can recall, we talked about that earlier. And it's now called a maintainable EBITDA. In other words, that EBITDA is going to continue. So if your EBITDA is $300,000 a year, they might say, well, I'm going to give you 80% of your money now, and if the EBITDA maintains at $300,000, at the end of the first 12 months, I'll give you the other amount of money. So what they're doing is building a bit of insurance to make sure, A, they're comfortable that the EBITDA figure was accurate, and B, they're wanting to make sure that you're still engaged at some level, that if they need assistance, you're still there. If there are issues that arise with certain clients, you're still there. So that may very well be asked of you. And if the business is a high value transaction, it will almost always, in the current market, be asked for. And quite frankly, some financiers will say to a purchaser, we want you to ask for it. Probably all heard of a SWOT analysis. So the next thing is do a SWOT analysis on your own business, but be honest. It's very easy with us as business owners to really see the golden side of our business. It's like our children. We find it really difficult to see that our children aren't quite as good as they could be or whatever. Because let's face facts, they are as good as they could be. But anyway, putting that aside, it's really difficult for us in our business to accept that it's not quite right. And to be frank, and if this gives you any comfort, no business is ever quite right, because we are constantly growing our businesses, they are constantly evolving, and therefore our processes and procedures are constantly changing. So you're never perfect. But have a look at your SWOT analysis, because guess what? That's what the purchaser and their accountant is going to do. And if you've got a good broker, that's what the broker will do during the appraisal, because the broker needs to make sure that they are forewarned and forearmed. So if they do a legitimate SWOT analysis and say, right, well, here's the issues that we're going to have to discuss with the purchaser and their accountant, how are we going to discuss those? So do a SWOT analysis. And as I said, you know, be a bit critical. View it from a purchaser's perspective. If you were going to buy your own business, what would you be looking for? How would you be assessing your business? What are the areas that you'd look at to say, well, you know, remember, a purchaser's job is to get the price down. What are the areas where you might say, oh, how can I get $100,000 off the sell price? What is it I can find in this business that is a weakness or as a threat or where there's an issue, so that I've got a bartering chip? If you do that first and your broker does it with you, you can both sit there, chat to your accountant and say, right, here is how we will deal with that particular issue or those issues. Be honest with yourself about your business and its value. Again, I've been a vendor. So what I'm about to say is from a vendor's perspective. It's really easy for us to say, well, the business is producing this amount of EBITDA or PBITDA, the multiple is 3, it's a $300,000 EBITDA, so it's $900,000 sale. But you know what? I've had this business for 18 years and I've put a lot of time and effort into this business and I think I should be compensated for that. Well, here's the bad news. The purchaser doesn't, their accountant doesn't, nor does a bank. So as vendors, and as I said, I've been one, we have to sit down and just be honest with it and say, all right, well, you know, what is the real value of this business? And it may be that that real value isn't enough for you to transact at that point in time, and you're better off continuing to trade for 3, 4, 5 years to get your overall financial position to a point where you are ready to transact. Remember, if you do that though, markets change and they change rapidly, and I'll give you a quick example which we can all relate to, and that is 12 interest rate hikes in about not even 2 years. So that's how quickly markets can change. Values of businesses drop dramatically because people have to borrow at higher rates, and all of a sudden what was worth $1 million is now worth $780,000 or $820,000 or whatever. So just be prepared that if you go for the longer track, that's fine. Just understand the market changes. Be prepared to negotiate and know your BATNA. Now the BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, you could enter into a negotiation, and a negotiation is very, very different to a sale. Okay, a sale is simple. You know, I've got a car here, you like the car, I think the car's worth $20,000, you think it's worth 19. Before you know it, we're sitting at 19.3 or 19.7 or 19.5 or whatever, and the car's sold. A negotiation is where you have reason to hold your ground at 20,000. So if it's a business, you need to be able to negotiate the process. If you're not good at negotiation, again, if you do get a broker, make sure they've got good experience at negotiation, because half a chance is the purchaser will, or at least their accountant will. So, but you've got to know what is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. In other words, you get very close to where you think you're about to sell, it all falls over. Have the backup plan. The best alternative might very well be continue trading. Best alternative might be let's find a different purchaser. Whatever it is, have that in your mind so that if it does fall over, you don't just suddenly go into shock. And understand that it's normal. I'm not saying it happens often, but it is normal for negotiations to break down. A lot of that will go back to how you negotiate. We'll talk about that in a second. And decide on the sale mechanism. So this is where it's worth talking to your accountant and perhaps your lawyer. So there's different mechanisms. A couple of basic mechanisms is an asset sale. So Joe Bloggs Proprietary Limited owns Joe Bloggs Car Wash. You're selling Joe Bloggs Car Wash and not Joe Bloggs Proprietary Limited in an asset sale. So the entity is in effect selling that asset off to whoever buys it. On a share sale, you're actually selling Joe Bloggs Proprietary Limited. Now in certain industries, share sales are the way transactions are performed, because in those industries there may be licenses or rights that are held by the entity for that business to trade, and those licenses and rights are actually attached to the ABN ACN. So if you try and sell the asset, the purchaser then has to try and get those rights or licenses. If you sell the shares, because the share sale, they inherit the licenses and so on, then what you end up with is it's business as usual. Difference about it though is, let's remember, in a share sale, they just take over a running business. All the cash in the business stays in the business. So all the creditors, the debtors, the whole lot stays there. As a vendor, you will want to be compensated for the cash at the bank. So you've got to make sure that a share sale agreement includes that you are covered, that if you've got $1 million in the bank, that $1 million is compensated to you. So the purchaser acquires the shares, the share sale occurs, but part of the transaction is they then have to give you that $1 million post-transaction or during the transaction. So if it's a share sale, it's not a simple thing. Remember that you may have just signed the biggest contract you've ever had. you're not going to get any benefit from that because it's a share sale. Okay? No work in progress, no anything. So just look at the differences. I'll talk about a share sale with a purchaser in a minute, but from a vendor's perspective, look at how it's going to affect you. So the other thing to look at is have clear knowledge of the finance you've got available. Now you do that with your accountant probably, and the idea is that if you go to market to purchase a business, you don't want to be looking at businesses that you're not going to be able to complete on. It's wasting your time. It's wasting the vendor's time. I can tell you that in our business, we ask every potential purchaser what their budget is. And we expect an honest answer because we'll work with them. And if the business they're wanting to look at isn't within their budget, we'll help you find something that is. So it's not a matter of, oh, I can spend whatever it takes. Just be upfront and say, I've worked it out. This is how much cash I have. This is how much money my accountant says I can borrow and my bank says I can borrow. So that's the total amount of money I've got to buy a business. So make sure that you're in that position, because any broker you deal with should be asking you and should be making sure that you can financially complete before you start spending money on due diligence or anything like that. Because it's an expensive process to make sure that that business is right for you. Have a clear position on your purchase budget. And you might think I was just talking about that. In actual fact, I wasn't. Knowing how much you can spend on the business is one thing. But then understanding what working capital you are going to need for that business is a different thing. If you're a manufacturer, you're going to need working capital that allows you to buy raw materials, for example. If you buy a business that's a cash business, as in it's a fast food outlet and primarily people would pay with cash or tap the card and you've got the money immediately, your budget, your working capital budget can be lower. So depending on the type of business, and again, get advice on this from your accountant, depending on the type of business as to how much working capital you need. It may be a month, might be 6 months. Have a look at how that impacts what you can and can't do as far as finance available. Consider the requirement for initial cash flow. And again, this is different. It's not working capital. Cash flow is different because, as we all know in business, cash is king. You know, profit is prince. Prince becomes king, but the king rules. We need cash. So you need to be able to say, if I'm buying a business and it's a business that has invoices, so I invoice people on 30 days, what do my aged debtors look like? And you might say, well, the current owner has aged debtors out to 45, 60, 90 days. I won't do that. Well, here's the bad news. Those clients are used to those terms. So what I'm suggesting is you can't change those terms overnight, or you may very well lose those clients because your competitor, or your new competitor, now you've bought the business, may be prepared to give 45, 60 days, whatever. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't put processes in place that over a period of time you can retrain your clients, because you can, but it's not going to happen overnight. So don't factor in an improved cash flow from debtors who are used to paying slowly immediately. You might budget that in for the next year and say, well, we're going to work on that and we believe we can rein it in by this amount. But from day one, this is how much cash flow I need. Consider your required return on investment. So I talked about multiples before. If I buy a business and it's a $500,000 EBITDA, and I'm going to give a multiple of 3, that's $1.5 million. Am I happy with having my investment returned in 3 years? You may be happy with that. I've seen them go out to 10 years because of strategic desire of the purchaser, and they really want that particular business. It's got high cash flow, it's got high profitability. They're prepared to pay 10 times the profit for it because it fits in with their aggregation, for example. But have a look at what you want to do. If you want to start aggregating businesses, you might say, well, I actually need my money back within a couple of years so that I can keep acquiring businesses. because I don't want to borrow too much money. I don't want to be highly leveraged, or highly geared. So have a look at what is the return on investment I want. Do all this stuff before you go to market to try and buy a business. Understand what is important to you in the purchase. Are you primarily interested in working in the business? Do you not want to work in the business? Do you want to be in a position where the business is under management and you play golf 4.5 days a week and you only go into the business half a day because of your lifestyle? Have a look at that. Understand it. Make sure that you're comfortable that if you're going to purchase a business, it fits with what's important to you. Yes, you need the return. Yes, you need something that's fulfilling and gives you comfort. But you also need to make sure that that business is going to suit your family, your life, and so it goes. And understand your position on vendor assistance. The interesting statistic, we collect a lot of statistics in our business. That's why I suppose we sell so many businesses. We understand the market. But one thing I can tell you is 82% of the people we sell businesses to have never been in the industry that they're buying into. And only 4.8% of businesses are sold to competitors of that business. So if you think your competitor's going to buy you, that may be the case, but you're against the odds. So if you've got 82% of people buying into a business that in an industry they've never been, you're the purchaser. What you've really got to do is say, all right, how much vendor assistance do I need and what do I need that vendor assistance to look like? The business may be under management. Assess the management team and say, yeah, I think they've got the wherewithal, or they need a little bit of work. Understand how much vendor assistance you need. And as I said, the type of vendor assistance. Because there are different levels of vendor assistance. Some vendor assistance is in-house on site, some is via email and phone or whatever. But be very clear on what you think you need because you want to succeed. So more areas for the purchaser to think about. Have a look at the purchase mechanism. We talked about the purchase mechanism for the vendor. Have a look at it from a purchaser's perspective, because if you do a share sale, for example, you take over an entity, warts and all. If there are skeletons in a closet, you now own that closet and consequently that skeleton. So have a real good look at how you want it to be. Do you want it to simply be an asset sale where you buy the business off of their entity and then all the skeletons stay because they belong to the entity? Or do you want a share sale? As I said earlier, a share sale really has benefit primarily where licenses or registrations or those sorts of things are attached to ABNs or ACNs, so that they automatically stay with the entity that you're taking over. Research the business you're looking at and really, take off the rose-coloured glasses, because I've seen purchasers who just go, oh, this is great, and they really don't do. I've seen some not even do their due diligence, to be frank, even though we prod them to do their due diligence, because our responsibility, as much as we may be working for a vendor, is to ensure that both parties have a fair and equitable process. But have a look at that business. You do your due diligence. What's on the internet about it? What's their Google ratings? What are the comments you're seeing? You might sit there and say, oh, I don't want to buy it because they've got all these bad comments. Well, consider that that's actually a good marketing opportunity. Because if you're buying a business that has some issues with it, you're getting it cheaper than it possibly is worth. Because if you believe truly you can fix those issues over a short enough period of time, short, mid-term, you're actually increasing the value of the business exponentially without having to bother with growing the business as such. So, but research it, understand the industry. Where's the industry going? If you were in 1997, you were offered a 1-hour film developing business to buy. Might have looked good at the time, but within 2 years Kodak were broke because digital cameras came along. So really have a bit of a look. Identify the strengths, weaknesses. So do your own SWOT analysis on that business and make sure that that business stacks up. Understand the weaknesses and the threats, understand the strengths and the opportunities, and you can then look at it and say, well, I know where I believe I add value to this business and I can grow this business. Equally, yes, as a purchaser, you'll take the weaknesses and the threats and try and use those to get the price down. That's the way it works. And be prepared to negotiate yourself and know your BATNA, so the best alternative to a negotiated agreement. Just because you're in a negotiation doesn't mean you have to stay in a negotiation. If it's not going to work, it's not going to work. But remember, it's not a sale. Anybody who tries to treat a business transaction as a sale is, in my opinion, doing the wrong thing. It is a negotiation. It needs to be conducted professionally and it needs to be conducted fairly so that all parties are comfortable that when that negotiated position is reached and you move towards settlement, all parties can sit there hand on heart and say, you know what, I'm happy with this deal. So vendor and purchaser behaviour. This is important because we see, and again, as I said, I've been a vendor, I've been a purchaser. We see emotion come in to the process. It's business, okay? Yes, there's emotion, but there shouldn't be the emotion of they're getting a better deal than me, or why have they done this, or second guessing things. Remain focused on the process. So, right, this is what we're trying to achieve here. I'm going to concentrate on that. And if we can achieve it, that's great. If we can't, we can't. Be flexible and patient. I said earlier that the average business in Australia at the moment is taking just under a year to transact. Some take longer. More complex businesses can take much longer. So be flexible, be patient. And by flexible, I don't mean be prepared to give things up you don't want to. I mean be flexible in the time frames things take. You may have to wait for banks to make decisions. We see banks at the moment taking months to make decisions and then taking weeks to release the funds. Nothing you can do about it, or the vendor or purchaser. It's a third party. Understand that the process will take time. Every part of it takes time. An appraisal, to give you an idea, when we do an appraisal, it generally takes at least 2 weeks. And the reason for that is because we don't just look at the financials. We normalise those financials, which takes time. We have to check that those normalisations are effective, so we check them with the vendor's accountant to make sure that, yes, we can normalise this or this percentage of it. We then, 2 weeks later, you may decide to list with us. We've then got to produce an information memorandum. Now, an information memorandum, again, will take about a week because it should be a quality document. Here's the basic rule in selling a business. You get one go at it. There's no dress rehearsal. So we've got to get it right from day one. So you've already 3 or 4 weeks down the track from when you first asked for an appraisal. Then we go to market. And then, of course, we've got to build interest. We've got to filter the interest to make sure that we're maintaining our communication with those that have capacity and intent, as opposed to all the smoke around. So the process takes a while. Be understanding of the other side's position. Have empathy. Because the best way to negotiate is being empathetic. It doesn't mean you have to agree with their position. But you're better off understanding why they have that position. Because if you can understand why they've got that position, then you can best understand how you can counter that position if it's a position you want to counter. Or you may sit back and say, yeah, look, I get your point, that's a valid point. I'm fine with that. Always be civil and courteous. It is not a competition. There are people out there who will tell you that negotiation is a competition, that it should be combative, that you should have the high ground on a negotiation if you want to win it. Well, those people are the ones who really don't get too far. A negotiation is a collegial process. It's a process where if you've got a good negotiator, broker working for you, they will understand very quickly, if they're working for you, what the other side is wanting, because they'll listen to what they say. My wife has a great saying, which I use in business, and she says, never listen to what a person's saying to you. Always listen to what they're telling you. And it's so true. And it is in negotiation, because people will say things, but what are you actually telling me? So be courteous, be polite, and you'll get a lot more information that will assist you in the process. Be aware of what you were saying and your body language. You know, and people will say they've crossed their arms, they're not happy, and those sorts of things. Well, that's not necessarily the case. Crossing your arms might just be the way that that person is comfortable. But there are certain body languages that will make you think, oh, I think they're losing interest, or they're really interested. Be very careful how you present yourself if you're the vendor or the purchaser, because a part of getting this negotiation working properly and achieving your goal, whether it be selling or buying, a good part of that is to be able to say, through your body, through your words, I'm fair income, we can make this transaction work, and it's going to be great for you, whether you're the vendor or the purchaser. Share legitimacy to your position. So if you're going to say, I think the business is worth $2 million, even though the appraised value was $1.5 million, because I spent 5 years building the business. That's not legitimacy, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. Emotionally it feels good, but when it comes to people writing cheques, it doesn't work. But there are plenty of ways to build legitimacy. So if you're going to say, hey, we're doing this in the business, and our budget is going to grow by this, and here's the evidence that we're using for that forecast. So build legitimacy. Don't threaten to end a negotiation unless you mean it. I've seen people do this thinking that, oh, well, I'm just going to tell them I'll walk out, and then they'll say, no, don't walk out. Trust me, 9 times out of 10, if you say you're going to walk out, they'll give you a wave. How about that? So theatrics don't work in a proper negotiation. You are better off sitting there and saying, well, staying focused and saying, well, where are we at with this? Where can we take it? If I can take it nowhere, that's fine, I'm out. And be prepared to work towards a win-win. And I know everyone talks about win-wins. Win-win's important. Both parties need to walk away. And we always say, you know, they should probably walk away saying, I didn't get everything I wanted, but I got a great deal. If one walks away and says, I got everything I wanted, it either means they didn't want much, or we didn't do our job. So both parties should have that give and take, but at the end of the day, for what's a win for them, they should have. And again, as I said, it's not a sales process. People say selling businesses. We negotiate transactions. That's what we do. We do not sell anything at all. And if any of our brokers do, then they'll be broking for someone else, because we're negotiators, we're professional negotiators, and that's how a business transaction should be conducted. Be prepared for different negotiation styles. There will be aggressive styles, there will be passive styles, there'll be those sorts of styles where you think you're getting a win, but all of a sudden you're not. Remember, a negotiation is not a competition, and a conversation is not a negotiation. And this is where a lot of people come apart. They think because they're having a conversation, they're negotiating. You're not. And very quickly a negotiation can turn to a conversation. So it's not a competition. You're not there to one-up somebody. You're there to achieve an outcome that is suitable to you and hopefully to the other party. Beware of creepers. What's a creeper? A creeper is we go to market $1 million for your business. Person comes in and says, I want to buy your business. And we're about to sign a contract at $1 million. They say, oh look, I've just got this problem with the business and that problem with the business. I really only think it's worth $950. And the vendor says, oh, it's only 50 grand, yeah, let's sign the contract. Then we go back to the purchaser and say, all right, we can sign at $950. Oh yeah, I was thinking about it, and because of this and because of that, I think it's worth $930. Then you go back to the vendor, and the vendor says, oh, it's only 20 grand. Well, it's actually not at 70. But they've got their head at $950 now. So a creeper is a purchaser who chips away bit by bit by bit by bit and brings the price down. We are very observant on creepers, and we give our opinion to vendors. When it comes to a creeper, it's up to a vendor what they do, but we'll give them our opinion. Check your emotions at the door, because I've seen plenty of negotiations fall over because people got all upset. And remember, it's not personal, it's business. If the transaction occurs, it occurs. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But it's got to occur to the satisfaction of both parties. So in summary, as a vendor, don't only have the facts and figures ready, but be ready yourself. As a vendor, be sure that the transition of ownership is what you want, and that you are ready for it, and emotionally as much as you are ready for it financially. As a purchaser, know your financial capacity. It's absolutely critical. Pointless getting involved in a transaction, spending money on due diligence only to find out you can't complete. Know what your return on investment requirement is as a purchaser, because you're going to need to know, when do I need to get this money back? Remember, as I've said repeatedly, it's a negotiation, it's not a sale. Forget that whole word selling, because that might be what you do in your business. You might sell things, but you don't sell your business. It's a negotiated transaction. And check your emotions at the door. And I know that's easier said than done. As I said, I've been a vendor, I've been a purchaser. It is easier said than done, but it's what's necessary if you want the transaction to proceed. And now I think we've got questions that have come through.
We do have a couple of questions. First question we have is, I've spoken to a broker and they have told me that I should list with them as they have a buyer for my business. Now, does this happen often? And how do I know that this is correct?
Well, the first thing, and look, it can happen from time to time where a purchaser will come to a broker and say, I want to buy A, B and C Proprietary Limited. If that is the case, the broker should then become a buyer's advocate for that purchaser and should approach you as a listed buyer's advocate. In other words, you as the vendor would not be responsible for any costs whatsoever for that broker. So yes, it can happen, but two parts of it. First of all, no one's a buyer until the money's in the bank. They may want to buy your business. They haven't seen the figures yet. They don't know the setup of your business properly. They don't know the systems, processes and protocols of your business. They can't really say they're a buyer. They're an interested party, and equally that broker should be engaged by the purchaser.
Another question here, which is an interesting one. If I sell my business, how do I make sure it is kept confidential? You have to advertise it, but how can I make sure that my employees won't work out that I'm selling?
And that's a critical one, because when you sell a business, we know what it's like. You want confidentiality. You don't want employees to know. You don't want suppliers to know. You don't want clients to know. You don't want Sally or Fred down the street to know. You want to do this in such a way that you get it transacted, but people find out when you choose to let them know what's going on. So to give you an idea, what we do is we market everything anonymously. Now, if you go on our website, RWC Business Sales, you will see the only businesses on there where you'll be able to identify that business is where the vendor has asked us to do that. Every other business will just say this type of business. It will have a bit about the business. It won't say the suburb. It will just say Adelaide, for example, if it's in South Australia, or if it's in the Greater Metropolitan Adelaide. If it's in the Greater Metropolitan Melbourne, it will just say Melbourne. So it's really difficult to work out what business it is. You'll know the industry, those sorts of things. Remember, as I said, 82% of our buyers really don't care what industry the business is in. So if it's managed properly, they have to inquire online. We do what's called a wet signature non-disclosure agreement. In other words, we then literally email them a non-disclosure agreement. None of this clicking online, I accept. They then have to fill out physically that non-disclosure agreement. They email it back to us. Then we engage with them verbally, and we will ask questions like, what's the budget, your budget, those sorts of things. How are you going to finance the transaction? Once we are fully satisfied that that particular individual is a legitimate purchaser who can complete, then and only then will they receive the information memorandum. We have a non-disclosure agreement, we've vetted them, we're comfortable that they're legitimate, then they can have the non-disclosure agreement. It's only at that point they know, the information memorandum, it's only at the point of receiving the information memorandum that they actually know it's your business. That's how you do it.
Two more questions. How long should I expect to be on the market if I decide to sell my business?
And that does depend on the business. However, as I said during the webinar, expect to be there for a year. And if it's all done and dusted in 3 months, that's great. But there's nothing worse than somebody saying to you, I can sell your business in 6 weeks, and there's that word sell again, sell your business in 6 weeks or 3 months or whatever, and 6 weeks or 3 months comes along and you're saying, well, how come I'm still here? Your broker should, if you engage a broker, your broker should just be honest and say, look, these things take a while. I can't give you a time frame, and this is the average in the market at the moment. And just expect that it's business as usual until the legitimate purchaser who can complete comes along.
Might do one final question?
Yeah.
So this is a good one. What should I be looking for when choosing a broker? And how can I be sure that I'm making the right choice when I pick one?
All right, so I suppose the first thing I would look for is somebody who understands business transactions. So if I sell residential property, your house, doesn't mean I know how to be a business broker. And quite frankly, I'm a business broker. I have a real estate agent's license, but I'm probably the last person you're going to want to sell your house because it's not what I do. So the first thing is have a look. What do they do? What's their experience in transacting businesses? Do they understand financial statements? Do they understand businesses in general, the logistics of businesses? What's their history? How many transactions have they conducted? What type of transactions have they conducted? Do they understand anything about my industry or not? They don't have to, but these are all the questions that you should be asking. What are their qualifications? Particularly if you've got a larger business. I can tell you that purchasers of larger businesses will actually look to deal with brokers who have tertiary qualifications in commerce or business. And the reason they do is because they do, and they want to be able to talk the same language. So have a look at the whole package and make sure that they're the right people. If you're going to judge them purely on the commission they're going to charge, and this is easy for me to say because I'm a broker, but if you're going to judge them purely on the commission they're going to charge and their fees, expect to be on the market longer than 12 months. So with the other questions, what we'll do, if it's okay, is we'll notify, we'll contact people who have sent those questions in personally so that we can give you answers to your questions. Other than that, thank you very much for your time. I hope you've enjoyed this and there's been good information for you, and have a great day.